Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening, as the shadows lengthen and the world settles into its quiet repose? Tonight, we journey not across the ocean, nor into the bustling heart of the empire, but rather to its very edge, a long, cold line of steadfast stone known simply as the Wall, the enduring monument to the Emperor Hadrian's decree, standing sentinel against the mists of the northern world. We seek the profound silence that clings to the ramparts of Britannia, where Roman ambition paused and the disciplined legions carved a definition into the wild, rolling earth, creating a thousand-year meditation in gray stone that still whispers tales of duty and distance to the passing wind. Imagine yourself standing upon the turf rampart, the ground firm beneath your hobnailed sandals, the great defensive ditch known as the vallum stretching away to either horizon like a scar etched by the gods themselves. This was the ultimate frontier, a place where the sun rose late and set early, and the light always carried a chilling sheen reminiscent of polished steel. The stone blocks, hauled and lifted by the immense effort of 3 legions, lie stacked 8 feet wide and 15 feet high, a calculated measure of Roman might built not merely to repel an army, but to declare an end to expansion, to delineate the known from the utterly unknowable, forcing the weary legionary to gaze northward toward a fog-shrouded land that Rome itself had chosen not to conquer, accepting a boundary for the first time in centuries. It is here, among the mile castles and the solitary turrets, that the true weight of the empire's structure can be felt. A burden of stone and separation laid upon the shoulders of men from Iberia, Gaul, and the sun-baked deserts of Africa, all bound together by the eagle standard and the silent demand of their distant city. The life of the sentinel, perched atop his tower as the drizzle sweeps in from the western sea, was a unique blend of interminable boredom and sudden, heart-stopping terror. For the threat from the north often manifested not as an organized invasion, but as quick, spectral raids by the tribes who understood the shadowed glens and hidden paths far better than any surveyor sent from Rome. He stood with his shield leaning against the damp wall and his gaze fixed upon the empty moors of Caledonia, listening intently to the sounds that the wind carried, the cry of a distant raptor, the unexpected snapping of a twig far below, or the faint, drumming sound of hooves upon earth hardened by frost. Knowing that his vigilance was the single thread holding the fragile peace of the province together, ensuring the quiet continuation of commerce and civil life south of the Great Barrier. This constant internalized tension lent the very air a quality of quiet menace, transforming the picturesque landscape into a stage for unceasing psychological warfare, where patience was the primary weapon and alertness the only defense against the shadowy figures who slipped through the heather like ghosts. When the mist rolled in thick and white, swallowing the peaks and valleys, the world shrank dramatically, confining the soldier to his immediate stone post, isolating him utterly from the neighboring mile castle and the familiar sight of the military way where supplies traveled. During these hours of profound blindness, the wall became not a protector, but a suffocating prison, cutting off sight and sound and leaving only the cold, rough touch of the wet stone for comfort. The centurion demanded constant communication, requiring horn blasts or shouted calls to be passed down the line, sound traveling across the obscured distance like a fragile lifeline stretched between islands of stone, desperately attempting to maintain the illusion of continuity in the face of nature's immense power to dissolve all human endeavor into formless gray obscurity. It was in such moments, when the known world dissolved, that the philosophical purpose of the wall asserted itself most strongly: teaching the men that the line between order and chaos was arbitrary, resting solely upon the discipline enforced by their own hearts and the unforgiving sharpness of their pylons. Look now towards the deep ditches that precede the wall, cut with such precision and effort by thousands of hands. They serve as a testament to Rome's desire for lasting control, a determination to shape the very earth to serve its defensive needs, ensuring that any approach from the north required a difficult scramble under a constant rain of projectiles from above. These steep, carefully engineered slopes were not intended merely to slow the enemy, but to frustrate their spirit, demanding an exhausting climb before they even encountered the towering stone barrier, draining their will before the real engagement even began. The true genius of Hadrian's construction lay not just in its defensive height, but in the psychological landscape it created, drawing a final, unwavering line in the wet soil of Britannia that declared, with quiet, monumental arrogance, that this far and no further shall the known world extend its civilized reach. The smaller settlements, or vici, clustered outside the main forts were a fascinating contradiction to the military discipline enforced within the barracks, for here the wives, traders, tavern keepers, and camp followers established a vibrant, if sometimes rough, civilian life, bringing the smells of roasted meat and fermenting grain right up to the grim, watchful gates of the fortress. These communities provided a necessary tether to the human world for the soldiers, many of whom served 25 years far from their families, offering fleeting moments of warmth and distraction from the relentless monotony of patrol duty and drill, allowing the hardness of the military spirit to soften slightly beneath the influence of domestic life and fleeting earthly pleasures. It was a symbiotic existence. The military required the suppliers and comforts of the vicus, and the vicus survived under the protective, though sometimes heavy, shadow of the legionary garrison, both entities bound together by the shared reality of life on the edge of the known cosmos, reliant entirely upon the integrity of the Great Stone Line. Consider the auxiliary soldiers, men drawn from tribes technically conquered by Rome, often serving under Roman centurions and marching under Roman standards, yet still maintaining some fragments of their native dress and strange guttural tongues. These diverse units, often specializing as archers, cavalry, or light infantry, formed the majority of the wall's permanent garrison, embodying the pragmatic complexity of imperial power. Their loyalty was bought and sustained through the promise of Roman citizenship upon retirement, a potent incentive that kept foreign hands steady upon Roman spear shafts, turning former adversaries into dedicated defenders of the very empire that had once subdued their ancestral homes, representing a unique historical exchange where freedom was traded for service and lineage was replaced by the durable identity of the Roman citizen. The wall thus became not only a military frontier, but a vast, silent crucible, forging disparate peoples into a singular, loyal entity dedicated to preserving the line Hadrian had drawn in the unforgiving northern landscape. As the moon arcs silently over the basalt ridges, illuminating the deep grooves left by ancient glaciers, the wall takes on a ghostly, monumental quality, appearing less like a defensive work and more like an eternal geological feature, as permanent as the hills themselves. During the cold watch of the 4th hour, when the barracks are silent and only the flickering beacon of the signal fire challenges the absolute darkness, the quiet majesty of the engineering effort reveals itself most fully, reminding the watcher that this structure was meant to endure far beyond the span of a single emperor or even a legion, projecting the power of Rome into a future that the builders themselves could never witness. The wind carries only the sound of itself, sighing over the moorland grasses, a deep, resonant sound that seems to speak of the earth's indifference to the brief, busy lives of men who build walls and then crumble into dust beneath their shadow. Yet, within the protection of the stone, there was culture and learning, as evidenced by the meticulously preserved wooden writing tablets found at the fort of Vindolanda, recording not just military logistics, but also invitations to birthday parties, complaints about poor beer rations, and requests for warmer cloaks from distant wives. These fragile, personal notes tear away the veil of martial severity, revealing the very human struggles, small joys, and simple domestic concerns that persisted even at the farthest edge of civilization, demonstrating that the needs of the spirit and the body remained constant regardless of the proximity to Rome or the presence of hostile tribes lurking in the dark woods. The wall contained a civilization within its shadow, a miniature world governed by the rhythm of the legionary trumpet, but still profoundly human in its daily requirements for warmth, companionship, and the occasional complaint about the quality of the local brew. The path alongside the wall, known as the Military Way, was the circulatory system of the entire frontier command, allowing fast movement of troops and supplies, a smooth cobbled road running from east to west, a visible thread of Roman efficiency laid down directly adjacent to the rough, untamed wilderness. Along this essential route, couriers rode hard, centurions inspected patrols, and heavy wagons creaked, sustaining the daily effort of holding the line, ensuring that the necessary tools of governance, the scroll, the coin, the sharpened steel, were delivered promptly to the furthest outpost, reinforcing the unwavering decree of the distant emperor. This road symbolized the relentless commitment of the empire to maintenance and logistics, a silent, pragmatic promise that though the troops were far from home, they were neither forgotten nor cut off, remaining firmly anchored to the vast, encompassing authority of Rome. Consider the philosophical implications of this structure. Hadrian, the traveler emperor, understood that true strength lay not in endless conquest, but in definitive consolidation, choosing limits over limitless expansion, thereby saving the immense manpower and financial cost required to subdue the perpetually resistant Caledonian tribes. The wall represents a profound shift in imperial thought, a moment where Rome acknowledged a frontier it would not cross, dedicating its resources instead to fortifying the ground it already held, a silent acceptance that some lands were too wild, too poor, or too fiercely defended to warrant the continued expenditure of Roman blood. It stands as a physical manifestation of a psychological boundary, defining the limits of the Roman self, a refusal to stretch thin, a decision to be great within defined lines, achieving a quiet majesty born of self-imposed restraint. As the night deepens further and the air grows crisp with a northern chill, the stars above the wall burn with an intensity unknown in the smoky south, offering the soldier on watch a breathtaking view of the cosmos, reminding him of his own minuscule place in the vast order of the universe. He sees the constellations known to his ancestors, Orion marching across the zenith, the Seven Sisters glittering dimly, the same celestial markers guiding farmers in Italy and sailors on the Mediterranean, connecting his lonely post to the entirety of the inhabited world, even as the stones beneath his feet mark his separation from it. In this silent contemplation of the eternal heavens above the eternal stone, the soldier experiences a rare moment of clarity, understanding that duty, while earthly and demanding, ultimately links him to a greater, immutable pattern of order, spanning both the width of the empire and the dizzying depth of time itself. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The sentinel shifts his weight against the cold stone of the turret, pulling his rough woolen cloak tighter, and turns his gaze from the star-pricked darkness back toward the massive structure running endlessly east and west, a silent monument defying the biting wind. He imagines the legions who first hauled these enormous blocks into place, men whose names are long forgotten, who spoke tongues of the Iberian coast or the shores of the Danube, laborers united only by the imperial command and the shared brutal task of mastering this difficult, unforgiving ground. The very stone beneath his hand seems to hum with the residual memory of their effort, holding within its matrix the echoes of hammers striking chisel, the creak of wooden cranes, and the rhythmic, weary chants that kept the pace during the long days of its initial construction, nearly a century and a half ago. The world to the south, in Tremorum, holds the comfort of paved roads, organized governance, and the secure predictability of Roman life. A measured existence protected by this very boundary, allowing civilization to flourish in the fertile lands behind the shield. Yet it is the world to the north, extramurum, that demands his constant sharpened attention. A realm defined by silence, shadowed hills, and the subtle, deceptive movements of the native peoples who drift like mist among the ancient mounds and standing stones, fiercely guarding the ancient ways that predate the arrival of the shining empire. The sentinel knows that while the Roman mind sees chaos in the north, the indigenous inhabitants see a deep, intricate order, governed by spirits of the moor and the cycles of the forgotten moon. An order that neither submits to nor fully comprehends the straight lines imposed upon their ancestral land, creating a continuous, silent tension along the length of the frontier. This divide is not merely geographical. It is a vast canyon separating two utterly different perceptions of time, civilization, and the appropriate relationship between man and the wilderness. Sometimes, when the wind dies completely and the air is impossibly still, he imagines he can hear the distant, low sounds of the Caledonian tribes, perhaps the muffled bleating of sheep far up the glen, or the distant rhythmic drumming accompanying a communal fire, the quiet evidence of lives lived in proud defiance of the vast power pressing against their territory. These unseen neighbors are the shadow counterpart to the Roman presence. Their resistance, tenacious and decentralized, has defined the shape of the empire here more surely than any imperial edict or ambitious governor, forcing the pragmatic acceptance of limits carved into the rugged terrain. He regards them not with the contempt sometimes taught in the ranks, but with the cautious respect one pays to a dangerous, persistent natural force, like the unpredictable flooding of a river or the sudden, fierce squalls that sweep down from the northern peaks, demanding constant, wary vigilance lest the natural world swallow the ordered world whole. This sentinel, like many who patrol these battlements, is not a citizen born of Rome itself, but perhaps a Tungrian from the lower Rhine, or a Thracian cavalryman whose ancestors rode the plains near the Black Sea, representing a complex intertwining of submission and upward mobility that fuels the long engine of the empire. His loyalty is not necessarily born of shared blood or the soil of Italy, but of the oath sworn before the standard, the shared hardships of the contubernium, and the promise of land and citizenship upon the completion of his long, arduous service, cementing his allegiance to the concept of Roman order. The wall, therefore, becomes his true homeland, a place where his disparate origins are momentarily forgotten, replaced by the singular identity of the frontier defender, upholding the peace that is meant to eventually secure his family's future far from this cold, damp land, giving meaning to his lonely watch. This realization brings a deep, steadying peace, confirming that his sacrifices here are not meaningless motions, but vital investments in a structured future that extends far beyond the confines of his current duty. The quiet majesty of the wall is perpetually underpinned by the ceaseless, unromantic labor of maintenance, the daily grind of repair that ensures its continued silence against intrusion, requiring a vast coordination of manpower and material from across the civilized world. Even in this deepest hour of the night, he knows that the logistical mechanisms of the empire are turning. Supply wagons lumbering slowly up the military road via Volum, provision boats docking at the nearest port, smiths tending the smoky fires in the fabrica to repair worn armor, and scribes in the fortress headquarters painstakingly recording stores of grain and wine with meticulous precision. The wall is less a finished structure and more a perpetually hungry mouth, consuming vast quantities of wood, iron, food, and above all else, the constant, disciplined attention of thousands of men, whose ordered lives create the very fabric of security that radiates southward towards the gentle, cultivated heartlands of Britannia and Gaul. He recalls the tales told around the barracks fires of the earlier defenses, the fleeting attempts made with wooden palisades and turf ramparts that marked Rome's initial, unsure exploration of this difficult region, often to be abandoned or overwhelmed by the relentless northern weather and the swift resilience of the local tribes. Hadrian's vision, realized in this permanent, mortar-set stone monument, represents a mature imperial philosophy, a rejection of flimsy, temporary barriers in favor of something utterly durable, a commitment to perpetuity that reflected the gravity of the decision to halt expansion here definitively. This stone curtain stands not only against the enemy without, but also against the restless ambition within Rome to perpetually overreach, demanding a steadier, more realistic assessment of what the empire could truly afford to defend and for how long it intended to hold the line against the wilderness. The wall, in this sense, is an act of imperial humility, a recognition of limits forged in hard stone. The great ditch running alongside the wall, the vallum, though less visible from this height, also forms an essential element of the psychological boundary, separating the military zone from the civilian landscape behind it and defining the legal sphere of imperial control. It is a further layer of division, showing that the separation is not just from the tribes outside, but also an internal division between the life of the soldier and the life of the settler, emphasizing the unique, hard duty required to sustain the frontier. The ground between the ditch and the wall itself became sacred space, a no-man's land reserved strictly for patrol and defense, constantly observed and policed, ensuring that no unauthorized dwelling or cultivation could obscure the necessary fields of fire for the archers and slingers on the battlements. The silence of the midnight hours is unlike the silence of the midday heat or the silence of the evening fires. It is a heavy, expectant silence, broken only by the natural sounds of the night. The cry of a distant owl, the rushing water in a subterranean stream, or the faint metallic clinking of the equipment he carries. This profound stillness allows the mind to wander and to settle, stripping away the noise of the barracks and the parade ground, demanding that the soldier confront the raw reality of his isolation and the enormity of the task entrusted to him. Yet this same vast silence is a meditative gift, a chance to fully absorb the weight of history and the fleeting nature of his own mortal tenure against the enduring presence of the carefully cut stones. A faint, almost imperceptible lightning begins to taint the deep indigo of the eastern horizon, suggesting the slow, inevitable approach of the dawn, a time when the cold is often at its most intense before the sun crests the distant, rounded hills, demanding a final burst of endurance from the weary watcher. The vast black shapes of the mile castles and turrets begin to detach themselves from the general darkness, gaining hard, defined edges against the emerging gray light, transforming the wall from a silent shadow into a solid, undeniable, and utterly real line of defense. The sentinel knows that soon the bugle will sound the change of the watch, calling the neighboring camps to life. The scraping of boots on stone, the clatter of buckets at the well, the distant shouts of the cohort centurions, ending the sublime isolation of his nocturnal vigil and returning him to the loud, demanding routine of the daylight world. For these final, waning moments of darkness, the enormous responsibility of the entire frontier rests entirely upon his shoulders, a weight measured not in physical stone, but in the unwavering vigilance of his unblinking eyes scanning the deceptive terrain where shadow and substance merge. Should he fail, should his mind wander or his eyes droop, the breach would threaten not only his life and the lives within the nearest fort, but the entire fragile network of Roman order stretching back to the sea, threatening the farms, the nascent towns, and the hard-won peace of the southern province. This thought focuses his attention like a perfectly ground lens, reminding him that the greatest strength of the wall lies not in the height of its enduring stones, nor the depth of its mortar, but in the unwavering discipline of the man who stands upon it, upholding the oath through the desolate, crucial hours between midnight and morning. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The sentinel drew a long, slow breath of the cold, damp air, feeling the final stubborn residue of the night clinging to the stone and the wool of his cloak.